Hey gang, welcome back to the Silver River Art Studio. Today I'm going to teach you how to make these cute crocheted hearts just in time for Valentine's Day. They make a great addition to your Valentine's Day decor, or as a little extra personal touch tucked inside a Valentine's card, or it can even be the card itself. And the best part is that this super simple pattern will take you less than an hour to make. This is a great project for beginning crocheters. If you've never crocheted before in your life, I have a fabulous tutorial that shows you everything you need to know, from how to choose the right crochet hook and yarn to step-by-step instructions on how to do the four most common crochet stitches, which are the building blocks for almost any crochet project, including this one. This tutorial is a great follow-on project from that video. I won't reiterate everything from the previous video, but I will slow down each time I introduce a new stitch in case you need a quick refresher on how each one is done. On the other hand, if you're already an experienced crocheter, the quick refreshers won't slow you down. If you do need to slow down the video or speed it up, I have a 2-minute tutorial on how to adjust the video speed to your own pace. And if you're a lefty, it also shows you how to flip the video to a mirror image to make it easier to follow. I will also be posting a free PDF of the pattern on my website at silverriverarts.com. First, let's talk about the materials you're going to need. You will need a cotton crochet thread or crochet yarn. That's because you'll need something that will really absorb the sugar water when we go to stiffen your heart. You'll also need a suitable crochet hook, a pair of scissors, and a tapestry needle or other needle with an eye large enough to accommodate your crochet thread. If you want to hang your heart as an ornament or attach it to a card, you'll also want some clear monofilament thread and a needle with a finer eye. I've provided links to supplies in the description box down below. To stiffen your snowflake, you'll need boiling water, sugar, a small bowl, a small whisk or a fork, a spoon, and some straight pins. Make sure that the pins are stainless steel or nickel-coated steel because you don't want rust spots on your project. You also need a piece of waxed paper and a piece of cardboard or a cardboard box. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, it's just to pin your heart into whilst it dries. I do find that a cardboard box works a little easier than just a plain piece of cardboard because you can pin deeper into it. If you decide to attach your heart to a card, then you'll need whatever you'll use to make the card and a little bit of Scotch tape. Don't forget to make sure that your hands are free of any lotion or anything like that before you start your project, especially if you choose to use white crochet thread. Today I'm going to use this acrylic yarn and a larger hook just to make it easier for you to follow along with what I'm doing. And a quick refresher on crochet pattern abbreviations are CH stands for chain stitch, SLST stands for slip stitch, SC stands for single crochet, and DC stands for double crochet. And asterisks mean to repeat the stitch series between the two asterisks the number of times indicated. So let's get started. We'll begin by forming a slip knot and sliding that onto our hook. We'll start by doing 4 chain stitches followed by a slip stitch. So I'll slow this section down just in case you need a refresher, then we'll speed up. For our first row, we'll chain 4, then we'll do 3 single crochets, and I'll slow these down a little bit again so you can see those. Then we'll speed up. We'll do chain 3, then we'll do 3 more single crochets in the ring, chain 3 again, do 1 single crochet in that ring, and then we'll do a slip stitch in the chain 4 that we made at the beginning of the row. For row 2, we'll chain 2, do 8 double crochets in the chain 4 loop at the beginning of the previous row. So I'll slow this down again so you can see those double crochets. And now we'll speed back up again. And I'll jump ahead a little bit here, but you can catch up with me once you have finished your 8 double crochets, and we'll go on from there. Now we're going to do 4 double crochets in the next loop, no chains between, just go from the 8 double crochets to the 4 double crochets in the next loop, chain 1, do 4 double crochets in that same loop, then jump to the next loop and do 9 double crochets, and they'll end with a slip stitch in that single crochet that we did at the end of the previous row. For row 3, we're going to chain 6, and then we're going to do a slip stitch in the 3rd double crochet of the previous row. Now remember, we did put in 2 chain stitches at the very beginning of that row, so we want to do it in the 3rd true double crochet. And then we're going to chain 7, and then we're going to slip stitch in the 6th double crochet. So once again, we're counting in that extra one at the beginning as a 7th. So we want the 6th true double crochet. And from here on in, it gets easier. So next we're going to chain 6. We're going to put a slip stitch in the space between where we had the 8 double crochets and the 4 double crochets in the previous row. Now we're going to chain 7. We're going to put a slip stitch in the chain 1 of the previous row between those two sets of 4 double crochets. Then we're going to chain 7 again. We're going to slip stitch in the space between the 4th double crochet and the 9 double crochets of the previous row. Then we're going to chain 6. We'll slip stitch in the 4th double crochet of the previous row. And those are all true double crochets in that shell. Then we're going to chain 7. We're going to slip stitch in the 7th double crochet of the previous row. Chain 6. And then we'll end up with a slip stitch in that slip stitch that's at the end of the last row. Congratulations, you made it. I promise this next row is going to be much, much easier. For the 4th row, we're going to do 3 single crochets in the first loop of the previous row. And then we're going to chain 6 and do a slip stitch in the next loop of the previous row 7 times. So remember, the asterisk means that you repeat that, and then it says how many times. Once that's done, we're going to chain 6. We'll do 3 single crochets in the last loop. We'll do a slip stitch in the slip stitch of the previous row, And that's it. I'm going to jump ahead in time and let you catch up to the end of row 4. So we'll go ahead and pause the video until you're there, and then we'll go ahead and start row 5. In row 5, we're going to make a whole series of shells. So I'll call them shell 1, shell 2, etc. For row 5, we're going to do 1 slip stitch in each of the first 2 single crochets of the previous row. Then we're going to do 1 single crochet in the 3rd single crochet of that row. Then we're going to skip to the loop, and we're going to do 2 single crochets in that first loop and 9 double crochets in the same loop. That's going to form shell 1. Now if you look at our heart, you'll see that we jump from shell to shell to shell without any stitches in between except at the point at the bottom. Then we're going to do 9 double crochets in the next loop to form shell 2, 6 double crochets in the next loop to form shell 3, 5 double crochets in the next loop to form shell 4. Now we're going to chain 2, and then we're going to do 5 double crochets in the same loop as we did the previous 5. So that'll form shell 5. So shell 4 and shell 5 come out of the same loop. Skip to the next loop. We're going to do 6 double crochets there to form shell 6. We'll do 9 double crochets in the next loop to form shell 7. And 9 double crochets in the next loop to form shell 8. Now we're going to add 2 more single crochets to that same loop so it matches the other side. We're going to do 1 single crochet in the first single crochet of the previous row, and then we're going to do slip stitches in the next 2 single crochets of the previous row. And then we're going to finish up with a slip stitch in the slip stitch from the previous row. So we're stacking our slip stitches, and it makes that little incurved part at the top of the heart. Now I'm going to go ahead and leave this series of stitches up on the screen for a moment, and then we'll flip over to a graphic that shows you the same sort of thing. That way, if you're a person who works better from written directions, you can follow the list. If you're someone who follows a visual diagram better, you can use that one. So you can pause the video either at the list or at the graphic and follow along until you get to the end of row 5. The good news is that this is the absolute most difficult part of this heart. Everything from here on in is smooth sailing. It's mostly chain stitch. You've got this. And don't forget that if you need to adjust the speed, you can always go to that 2-minute tutorial of mine. I'll link it here again, and then you can go along at a pace that's comfortable for you. Okay, let's start row 6. Good news, row 6 is basically a series of slip stitches and a bunch of chain stitches. So we're going to start out by doing slip stitches in the first 2 slip stitches of the previous row. Then we're going to do slip stitches in the next 2 single crochets of the previous row. Then we're going to do a single crochet in the first double crochet of shell 1. Now we're going to chain 6. Now we're going to do a slip stitch in the 4th double crochet of shell 1. Then we're going to chain 6 again. We'll do a slip stitch in the 7th double crochet of shell 1, and then we're going to chain 6 again. Then we're going to do a slip stitch in the space between shells 1 and 2, chain 6 again, slip stitch in the 4th double crochet of shell 2, chain 6 again, slip stitch in the 7th double crochet of shell 2. So shell 2 is looking a lot like shell 1, isn't it? Then we're going to chain 6. We're going to do a slip stitch in the space between shells 2 and 3. Then we're going to chain 6 again. We'll do a slip stitch in the 4th double crochet of shell 3. Chain 6 again. Slip stitch in the space between shells 3 and 4. Chain 6. Slip stitch in the 3rd double crochet of shell 4. Chain 6. And slip stitch in the space between shells 4 and 5. And you're halfway through row 6. I'm going to go ahead and leave this list on the screen here for a minute. So if you need to pause the video so that you can catch up, that's fine. And then you can restart once we're ready to do the other half of row 6. Now, as we go back up the other side of your heart, you're going to be doing the same thing, mirror image. So if you're not sure, you can always look at what you did on the other side. So we'll start out by chain 6. And then we're going to do a slip stitch in the 3rd double crochet of shell 5. Chain 6 again. Slip stitch in the space between shells 5 and 6. Chain 6. Slip stitch in the 4th double crochet of shell 6. Chain 6. Slip stitch in the space between shells 6 and 7. Chain 6. Slip stitch in the 4th double crochet of shell 7. Chain 6. Slip stitch in the 7th double crochet of shell 7. Chain 6. Slip stitch in the space between shells 7 and 8. Chain 6. Slip stitch in the 4th double crochet of shell 8. Chain 6. Slip stitch in the 7th double crochet. Chain 6. Single crochet in the 9th double crochet of shell 8. Single crochet in the single crochet of the previous row, and then you're going to slip stitch in the next 5 slip stitches, and that brings us back to the center of our heart. And once again, I'll freeze this here for a moment so that you can catch up. Okay, let's start row 7. Another super simple one. We're going to slip stitch in the first slip stitch of the previous row. Then we're going to chain 6. Then we're going to slip stitch in the first loop of the previous row and chain 7. And then we're going to slip stitch in the next loop and chain 6 and slip stitch in the next loop over and over again. Remember, when you see the asterisks in a pattern, it means you repeat the part between the asterisks the number of times stated. So we're going to do that 17 times. And once again, you can pause as long as you need to in order to catch up, and we'll see you in the next step. And we're back to finish up row 7. We're going to start by doing a slip stitch in our next loop, and then we're going to chain 7. Then we're going to do a slip stitch in the next loop, chain 6, and then we'll finish by doing 2 slip stitches, one in each of the last 2 slip stitches of the previous row. And once again, we're back to our beginning. Okay, let's get started on row 8. Row 8 is our last row. It's super simple. Whole bunch of slip stitches, whole bunch of chain stitches, and a couple of extra single crochets thrown in for some spice. The one thing to pay attention to in this row is that the number of chain stitches that we're going to do is going to vary. There really is a method to the madness, and if you look at this graphic, you can see what it is. I'll also walk you through it as I have with the previous rows. Okay, we'll start out by doing a slip stitch in the first slip stitch of the previous row. Then we're going to do 3 single crochets in the first loop of the previous row. Now we're going to chain 8 and then do a slip stitch in the next loop 3 times. As a handy way to check your work, you can see that where you change the number of chains lines up with the space between 2 shells. Then we're going to chain 7 and do a slip stitch in the next loop 3 times. Now we're going to chain 6, do a slip stitch in the next loop 8 times. That will take us all the way around our heart, and we'll start up the other side, and you can pause the video at any time to catch up. Now we're going to chain 7, do a slip stitch in the next loop 3 times. We're going to do a chain 8, slip stitch in the next loop 2 times. And then we're going to chain 8 and do 3 single crochets in the last loop, and then we're going to come back and do a slip stitch in the last slip stitch of the previous row. And that's it. All you need to do is cut off the end of your thread. Make sure you leave yourself a couple of inches because we're going to need to sew that end back in, and then pull that end through the loop, pull it tight. Your heart's finished. And all you need to do for the next step is sew those loose ends back in and trim them off. Okay, let's make sure we have all the supplies that we need. We have our hearts, of course. We have sugar, boiling water, a small dish, spoons, a whisk, straight pins. Now remember to make sure that they are rust proof. We've got a piece of wax paper, and we've got a cardboard box to pin into. So we're good to go. If you've done hearts in multiple colors, make sure that you do your white or lightest heart first, and then work your way to your darker colors Red in particular is a notoriously unstable dye color, and although these are supposed to be stable colors, you don't want to run the risk of winding up with a slightly off hue of your hearts. You'll also notice that the wax paper that I'm using has 2 creases in it, and I did that so that I will have straight lines so that I can use that to line up my hearts as I pin them out. So now I have my wax paper pinned to my box. We'll get the sugar water ready. And we'll want to use boiling water for this. And the reason behind that is that the hotter the water is, the more sugar it can absorb. So then we're going to put some sugar in, be fairly generous. This is why we're using a small bowl, because we don't want to waste sugar. But you can put a fair amount in and then just continue to stir it until it dissolves. Why sugar? Why not start your hairspray? Some folks recommend them, but both of them will discolor over time, which sugar will not do. And they may not make your heart stiff enough. On the other hand, if you want a softer heart, perhaps you aren't planning to hang it as an ornament, you can just use water if you'd like. Either way, make sure that your hands are free of any lotion or anything so that it doesn't transfer to your project. So my sugar is mostly dissolved now, so I'm going to add a little bit more to be a little bit more generous. And then once that has dissolved, we'll be ready for our next step. I went ahead and pinned out 3 of the hearts already, and I'm going to do the red one last. So you want to squeeze it full of the water, squeeze it out again, and then dip it a couple more times, squeeze it again, making sure that it's totally saturated, but that you've gotten out any excess water. And then you'll want to lay your heart out in line with those creases on your wax paper. So we'll zoom in a bit here, and you can see what I'm doing. I've pinned at the very top center of the heart where the first set of shells are, and then I'm pinning at the bottom of that section as well. And then I'm going to pin to the left and the right of that, pinning in those spaces in between the shells. And you want to draw this fairly tight, and you can always reposition them as you need. And then we're going to go around and we're going to do the remainder of those spaces between the shells. So this is where you're really creating the shape of your heart, pulling it out the way that you want, whether you want one that's skinnier, whether you want one that's a little plumper. You can determine that at this stage. So now we've got all of the shells pinned into place. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to push them out a little bit. You can use the pin inside just to give it a little bit more of a heart shape, and that looks a little bit better. Our next step is that we're going to pin all the way around the perimeter, and we're going to do it where the row 8 slip stitches are made into the row 7 loops. We don't want to do it in the row 8 loops just yet, just in the row 7 loops. And you want to make that fairly tight. And because watching somebody pin something out to dry is almost as much fun as watching it dry, we'll jump ahead. And now you can see that we've got all of those joints between row 7 and row 8 pinned out. So now I'm pinning out the loops from row 8. Now those ones we want to make a little bit looser, not as tight as the previous ones, because we want them to have a little bit of a curve, unless you want to have a very, very spiky Valentine. And here we have all 4 hearts pinned out and dried. So we're going to go ahead and start removing the pins. Don't forget to wash the pins. You don't want to have your next project get sticky. And once you've removed all the pins, it's a simple matter to hang it. Take a piece of monofilament thread, about 6 inches or so will work. Snip that off, and then just thread it through the needle and thread it through the heart. or it would be a simple matter if you could get the needle threaded. Monofilament thread is very, very slippery, and that combined with how stiff it is can make it really, really hard to tie a good tight knot. I find that the easiest way to do this is usually to join the two ends of the monofilament together and then tie them as a single knot and do that knot twice. You can then trim off the monofilament, but don't trim it too close to the knot or it may come undone. If you want to turn your heart into a card, then you can go ahead and make the card however elaborate or simple as you would like, and then place the heart where you would like it on the card. Then you're going to take a needle threaded with monofilament thread, and you're going to use it to mark that point where you want the top of the center of the heart, and you're going to poke a hole through. You're not going to draw the needle through. You're going to draw the needle through from the back, and you're going to put it through that hole and then also through the top of the heart. Then you're going to slide your needle back through to the back side and pull it tight. Now you want to even up your ends of your monofilament thread so that you can tie them. And you'll tie them off, leaving, about 3 inches on each one. So once again, your thread's going to be about 6 inches long. So tie 2 knots, and then you're going to do the same thing with the bottom of the heart, but you can use a shorter piece of monofilament because you're not going to need to hang it from it. It's just to hold it in place while you send the card. And the final step to creating your card is to pull both pieces of monofilament tight so that it holds your heart where you want it, and then tape the lower piece of monofilament in place, and then pull the entire length of the upper monofilament through, and then wrap it around your finger and tuck it under the tape. And that will hold it snug while it's in transit. And that's it, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. If so, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. And feel free to leave any questions or comments that you may have in the comment box below. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll know when my next video goes up. You can find a free PDF of the pattern on my website at silverriverarts.com. And when you do make one or more of these hearts, please also post a picture of them to Instagram or other social media with the hashtag silverriverhearts. And I look forward to featuring them in a future video. Have a happy Valentine's Day.